Hey guys, Palsteron here. And today let's talk about my Kinetic Blast cast on crit Fireball Deadeye. So when the unique ring Nimis got revealed, I instantly fell in love. I knew that I wanted to make at least one build with it until the league ends, so this is my attempt at getting the most out of it, while also reviving one of the oldest and most synergistic spells in the game, Fireball. This build is also inspired by Jungron's Val Fireball video, and he's also the creator of the One Ring to rule them all. Whenever Fireball projectiles return to you, an explosion happens, similar to when Fireball hits a wall, and these explosions can all overlap, aka shotgun. This, coupled with the ridiculous base damage that Fireball has, makes it the premier skill to use in this scenario, even over stuff like Creeping Frost. As my cast on crit activator, I chose Kinetic Blast, mainly because it has similarly awesome scaling with Nimis and has a lot of screen coverage. We also go Deadeye for even more additional projectiles, as well as wall chain through Ricochet, transforming the build into a ridiculous clear speed and single target damage machine alike. To help Deadeye get crit capped, we're using the Leadership's Price unique amulet to make full use of the alt ailments, in particular Brittle. Nothing could have prepared me for the screen blinding awesomeness that this build has become throughout its runtime, and I'm happy that absurd, fun, and overpowered uniques like this can still make it through the balancing process. With that being said, let's get into the build portion of the video. So this whole build revolves around Nimis, and Nimis has two very interesting lines here. The first one is projectiles return to you at the end of flight, and the second one is projectiles are fired in random directions. The random direction part is usually a big downside. In the Fireball build, it doesn't really matter too much. But the thing is, projectiles return to you at the end of flight is very interesting for a few projectile skills, and those are mostly the ones that also have an AoE component. And the reason this ring is so good is that while you cannot hit the same target with multiple projectiles, you can hit them with the area of effect part of Fireball. And in order to show you what I mean, I will just hard cast Fireball real quickly so you can kind of see. So when I press the button, Fireballs are going to go out and they're going to come back to me. Now the thing that you saw here at the end is an explosion. To be more specific, an explosion of all the Fireball projectiles that I just shot. Here it is again. So what this means is that a skill that usually should not shotgun, that can only really shotgun if an enemy is exactly next to a wall, you kind of have this effect on anything, just that you are sort of the wall that all the projectiles are going to come back to and explode on. Now, the number one question that I get asked is, why do I not use Creeping Frost? Creeping Frost is very often used for overlaps like that. It's basically the same skill as Fireball in the sense that it has a projectile component and it has an AoE component. But the thing about Creeping Frost is that you can actually exactly target where you want, and it can exactly overlap as much as you want. So for example, I just put in Creeping Frost with Greater Volley. That on top of the Deadeye, I'm going to have 7 projectiles, and now I can just target here, and all the projectiles are most likely going to overlap on the same target. So why do these whole Nimis shenanigans? Well, it's a very easy numbers game because Creeping Frost is balanced about being able to be shotgun. It has very low damage on its own. You can see right here at level 21, Creeping Frost has 638 to 952 damage, and Fireball is not designed to shotgun, and once you make it shotgun, you will realize this does 3 times the damage of a Creeping Frost. Fireball is one of the highest damage skills in the game currently, and it is definitely not supposed to overlap, and that is what makes this combo so broken. Now, if you're asking why not Creeping Frost with Nimis, well, that kind of defeats the purpose because you already have that shotgunning capabilities anyways, and all you would have is a Fireball that does 1/3 of the damage. So this is how it would basically look like. I mean, I don't think I have to explain why I'm not running this. So TLDR, Fireball is just absolutely incredible with Nimis, and it's basically 3 times the damage of a Creeping Frost. Creeping Frost has a few upsides, like, for example, you are scaling cold, so you can go for Hatred Watcher's Eye, which is very nice for the extra crit, meaning that on a Deadeye, usually crit can be a problem, although with Brittle, not really. And you can do some quality shenanigans with Divergent Creeping Frost, Dialas plus Ashes to the Stars. It completely pales in comparison to a Fireball. Now, the second question I get quite a bit is, why not use Cyclone or Tornado Shot? Cyclone, I can answer pretty quickly. Cyclone is, as always, the best proc for cast and crit. It is incredible, but it doesn't really have anything synergistic going on with Nimis. We're also not really scaling much AoE, right? We are a Deadeye, which is projectile based, so You don't really get anything out of Cyclone, and everybody who ever tried a cast on crit build with Cyclone, where you don't have much AoE, it's just kind of a nuisance. You always have to be on top of enemies, and sure, against bosses, you want to do that anyways, but if you have to do that while clearing, it gets really annoying real quickly, especially if you compare it to something like KB, where you just throw out the projectiles and just everything explodes. Now, the second question of why I'm not using Tornado Shot, this is actually what I started out with. When Nimis came out, I was really hyped about Tornado Shot, but turns out it actually doesn't work with Tornado Shot the way I thought it did. So to quickly showcase you this, let's quickly put on the greater multiple projectiles right here. I will show you how Tornado Shot looks like. So the problem is, I'm just gonna cast it right here. What you see here is Tornado Shot, and everybody who's ever played Tornado Shot knows one of the big things that it has going for it is that you can aim it like here, and then it's basically going to completely off-screen anything. What you see here is basically like a melee style. So if I go around like this, you will see it's not very impressive. Now, why does it look like that? Well, turns out the way Tornado Shot works with Nimis is it doesn't explode its secondary projectiles when it's going out. So for example, if we look at Tornado Shot normally, right, you aim here and all the secondary projectiles explode. But with Nimis, what happens is the projectiles only explode into their secondary projectiles once it comes back to you. So I click it, nothing happens here, and once they come back, they explode on you. And this basically takes away all of the upsides of Tornado Shot. It is pretty damn clunky. I tried it out. I didn't like it at all. Obviously, you could go Blast Rain, but that is a little bit too slow for my taste personally, but you can definitely play around with both cast and crit versions. So to finally get to why Kinetic Blast is just incredible with Nimis. I'll show you what happens once I press it. So basically what happens is everything explodes as normal. You get the Kinetic Blast explosions just as normal. The projectiles, they can fork, they can chain, whatever you want. But once they come back, they explode onto you in a pretty damn big radius. And I don't have much AoE. I want to point that out right here. I'm not like an AoE stacker. I maybe have like 30-40% AoE. And there's also this thing where the projectiles and the AoE are a little bit staggered in terms of when they happen. First the projectile hits and then the AoE a little bit after, basically making it so you can get 2 procs off from your cast on crit. So while it won't use up your cooldowns perfectly all the time like a Cyclone would, you will very quickly see that the ease of use and just how fun this skill is completely overshadows that. As for cast on crit cooldown breakpoint, as I said, you won't be hitting it perfectly. So even if it says 0.099 seconds here, that doesn't mean that you're automatically going to trigger 10 times. However, you will definitely trigger more than 4 times. This is just one of the outgoing projectiles. It does not take Nimis into account completely. In my experience, it's going to be around about 7 to 8 triggers per second. Now, in terms of cast on crit cooldown breakpoints, all you have to know is that cooldown recovery doesn't necessarily mean cooldown recovery. There's a certain server tick rate, so there's an amount of cooldown recovery that you need to get to in order for it to actually do something. And in order to show you this, quickly open the new POB. Now you have a fireball and a cast on critical strike, 0 cooldown recovery rate. Let's say, for example, that I would get 10% increased cooldown recovery rate, right? Nothing will happen here. And that is simply because you need to get to the next breakpoint for it to do anything. And that cooldown recovery rate is actually 14. So if you put 14 in here, you will see that the cooldown goes down to 0.132. And if we were on 13, wow, it's back to 0.165. And all you have to know for this build is you want to get to 52% cooldown recovery rate. And then you have the, in my opinion, prime cooldown, which is 0.099 seconds. And this is a lot easier to hit than you think because Awakened Cast on Crit already gives you a lot of cooldown recovery. We actually have 3% too much. We have 55, which doesn't do anything. 34 or higher works. Now, the way you get this gem to level 10 is either with +1 from the chest. I think you don't even need the +1 from the chest. I think this could also be on level 5. You just have to try that out yourself. But what helps here is the critical mastery that gives you +3 to all critical support gems. And then the rest you will just fill up with either your boots or your belt or even both. You can get up to 20% cooldown recovery rate with elevated cooldown recovery. Now then I want to quickly talk about Leadership's Prize, which is the amulet right here. A Leadership's Prize is a really strong item that is used in a lot of builds to fix certain shortcomings. In this case, the number one reason I use it is because Deadeye has quite a big problem with capping the crit. And since we're also not a cold skill, we can't use the Watcher's Eye to get base crit while using Hatred because we're not using Hatred. And this is where Brittle comes in. Now, if you're thinking, why am I not just using Interrogation, get Secrets of Suffering? The problem is, You can inflict Scorch, Brittle, and Sap, but it still matters if you deal cold damage, lightning damage, or fire damage. So on the fire skill, we could only Scorch. We can't really Brittle or Sap. Now, you can add a little bit of cold in there, but it will never get you the amount of Brittle that we need for this build. However, Leadership's Prize is worded differently. It says you have Scorching Conflux, Brittle Conflux, and Sapping Conflux. And that means that your damage type does not matter. You can always inflict Brittle, always inflict Sap and Scorch, which is obviously very advantageous for a fire skill. What I'm trying to say is this amulet is absolute GG for this build. Now, the thing about it is, though, that you have to have your 2 highest attributes equal, and that is actually more annoying than you might think, since we're a Deadeye and we're pathing on the right side of the tree. You can see right here that my 2 highest attributes are Intelligence and Dexterity, so I did even it out, but I only did that by getting a little bit of int over here accidentally, a 55 int from the Adziri's Reflection, and I think I also have Intelligence from my ring. Another thing that also helps is a Militant Faith right here. And Militant Faith is incredible. It gives you reduced mana cost, which is really huge. We're going to talk about that at the end of the video, because mana cost is kind of a thing on Cast on Crit nowadays that needs to be solved. It also gives us a ton of all elemental resistance per 10 devotion. All you have to know is that all these small nodes right here that are usually dexterity get converted to devotion. And that doesn't only mean that we get the stats from the Militant Faith, it also means that we have less dexterity because all these nodes get converted. For example, without the jewel, you can see right here, I would have to get another 70 or so intelligence to match the attributes again. So if you just jumbled some items around and you feel like your damage sucks, the reason is most likely that you forgot about Leadership's Price and evening out those top 2 attributes. And you can always see if it's up here, it says Scorching Conflux, Brittle Conflux, and Sapping Conflux. Now let's quickly show you a map. First up, to show you the empty axes, how cool they look, but also quickly go over it, I guess. So all you do is really throw out Kinetic Blast, and it's going to proc fireballs, shield charge around, and against bosses you can press Fallibility if you want to, although if you have enough gear you won't need to, and then Val Haste to get a little bit faster. In terms of MTX, we're going to try out a few. Right now I have the normal fireball with the normal KB. I'll show you how this looks. This is basically what you're going to be looking at. Actually, I have no auras on. Let me quickly fix that right here. All right, so this is how it's going to look if we're normal fireball. I can quickly talk about this a little bit more. I have the Sun Prism Herald, which is very, very fancy. I can also show you the one that is a little bit more of eye cancer, which is the Dragon Fireball one. This can lag out your game quite a lot, but it's a lot more in your face, as you can see right here. This one is quite a banger if you like to have glasses once you're 40. Absolutely awesome. And my personal favorite is Dire Blade 1. It just kind of fits nicely with the whole blue theme. In terms of herald effects, I mean, you can take whatever you want. It's all fine and dandy. Everybody has their favorite ones. I just really like Sun Prism. So this is all you do. You basically just waltz around and kill everything. Boss damage is obviously going to depend on your gear, but most likely what's going to happen is this. Now then, let's talk about Deadeye. So why am I not going something like Power Charge Stacking, Assassin, Occultist? The main reason is that Deadeye is just too goddamn fun to play, and the additional projectiles just give you so much coverage. One of the biggest downsides of the Nimis ring, which is that projectiles are fired in random directions, is that some projectiles just never hit. Sure, they come back at the end, right? But when you're clearing a map, you still want to have those projectiles actually hit something and chain around. So that's where these 2 projectiles come in very, very nice. It's also extra single target damage. It's just incredible. And the Ricochet is, I think, the biggest reason to go Deadeye. Now, I don't know if you've ever played with Ricochet and these nodes right here. The chaining range, you get 45% increased chaining range. I can just tell you to do it one time for your own sake. If stuff chains off of walls and it has this kind of chain range, it's just going to go all over the place. It's going to like off-screen things that you didn't even know were there. So Ricochet and Endless Munitions are the biggest reason. Now, the third reason is you also get Tailwind. And not just Tailwind, but a super beef Tailwind, a 20% Tailwind. And that is super important on Cast on Crit builds, because Cast on Crit builds cannot get Tailwind, Onslaught, Elusive Boots, because they need cooldown recovery, Onslaught, Elusive Boots. So if you wouldn't get Tailwind here, you wouldn't get it all. And then at the end, we have Focal Point, which gives you increased effect of your marks. Now, Sniper's Mark, as you can imagine, is pretty damn brutal with Fireball. All those Sniper's Mark projectiles also are coming back and are also hitting again. So yeah, getting the increased effect will also mean that your sniper's mark splits into more projectiles. Now, one thing that is definitely easier on Assassin is getting crit capped, but the thing is with Brittle, and also we have a Fireball. One of the nice things is Fireball has an alt quality on Divergent, which gives you effect of non-damaging ailments on enemies, which means it's way easier to apply a higher Brittle, higher Scourge, higher Sapped. Basically, that means that crit is not really that big of a deal. You will have to, however, scale some of these medium clusters right here, but you want to do that anyways. It also gives you double damage, gives you movement speed, attack speed, so it's not as big of a deal as you might think. One of the big downsides of Deadeye, however, is that it doesn't have any intrinsic defensive layers though, which we're going to compensate a little bit for with gear. Talking about gear, let's get into gear. First up, the Nimis ring. It is very expensive right now. Now, is it necessary? The answer is yes. You will have clear speed with this build still, so if you want that, sure, but your single target damage is going to be really, really bad. If you want to know how good Nimis is, it isn't just a little bit more single target, it basically times 8 to times 12s your single target. It is the reason I made this build in the first place. It is the reason I play Fireball whatsoever. Otherwise, you might have to consider other things. In general, Nimis is just absolutely incredible, as already showcased in the intro. Then Leadership's Price. Leadership's Price is necessary because of the Brittle, where Deadeye, you should definitely use it. If you don't want to use Deadeye, you're missing out. I can just tell you that right now. If you want to go Assassin, sure, but it's not going to be anywhere close to as fun in terms of like the projectiles on the screen as it is with the Deadeye, I can assure you. When it comes to like saving costs here, you can just go for less maximum resistances. Just make sure that maybe you don't get any minus max resistances because it can make you pretty squishy. Now, after these two that are necessary, the rest is basically rares and some interchangeable items. I'll quickly talk about this belt. I just bought this belt for the showcase because I didn't want to showcase the build with a Headhunter. I'm usually running a Headhunter, which is alongside Mage Blood, obviously the best in slot. It goes basically Mage Blood, then Headhunter, then just a rare belt. If you have a rare belt, that can help you cap your cooldown recovery without having to get it on the boots, which would save you quite some currency. So let's talk about the rest here. First up, the wand. Now, projectile speed is a big one on this build, believe it or not, because basically the fireballs go out and come back faster the more projectile speed you have, which means that if you don't want to wait forever for your fireballs to come back, it is going to be a huge stat to get. We're even getting more on that in the gem section. We're going to talk about that later. So basically what I wanted here is I wanted to spam Deafening Essences of Dread, which guarantee you the projectile speed. And basically you want Fractured +1 levels of all spell skill gems or fire spell skill gems. Now, a very important stat that you want is as much base crit chance as you can. So the increased critical strike chance is super important. If you can get some attack speed, you can also do crit chance for spells. You can do critical strike multiplier, whatever floats your boat. And then in the prefixes, you can do something like Ashling, which I did here with the spell damage, gain 5% of non-chaos as extra chaos. And then at the end, the craft from fire as extra chaos. As for enchant, I picked attack speed because I was already crit capped, but if you need crit, you can also do the crit enchant for harvest. Then we have the helmet. One thing I will say is that I'm actually not sure if I need the helmet enchant. Initially, I put it there for a little bit better clear speed, right? Kinetic Blast has a chance for an additional explosion, but as it turns out, it's probably unneeded. You can do something like Sniper's Mark effect, or if you need to, some sort of mana reservation efficiency. The big thing in the helmet is you want spell suppression to get your spell suppression capped, some life. But the biggest thing here is, number one, mana reservation efficiency. We get it twice. We get it from the implicit and from the item itself. I was crafting this with Deafening Essences of Loathing. And then the implicits, obviously, you have to get with the Eldritch Currency. Now, then in terms of physical defensive layer, that is the reason why I chose Lightning Coil. It has the 50% of physical damage from hits taken as lightning damage, which is very huge, especially since we even get some max res from something like a Leadership's Price. Even go more for it if you want to, for example, if you have a Mage Blood. But the thing is that it is just way, way better than getting a tiny bit of armor. We have 8% of physical damage taken as fire from here, and then 50% from the Lightning Coil. You can even go Taste of Hate, which is what I would do, for example, if I was to boss instead of the Dying Sun. Important to note, though, one reason why I did this was because I wanted to get to 99. If you already have a leveled character, or if you level up with 5 ways anyways, then defenses, it depends on how much you want to go into it. If you are fine with a squishier character, we still have the 100% spell suppression, so whatever floats your boat. One of the biggest reasons why I use Lightning Coil is because of the +2 levels. So what I'm trying to say is, if you have no +2 levels Lightning Coil, then go something different. You definitely want the +2 levels. These are huge. The +2 and the +1, which also scales Empower, together is like 40% more damage. You don't need both, but at least one of them. And otherwise, there is a lot of other good unique body armors, for example, something like a Dialas or something like a Cloak of Flame, whatever you want to. If you get some sort of +4 on your skill, remember that Fireball is both projectile and AoE, so you can get projectile, AoE, or +2 level. Now, when it comes to the shield, I chose Interior Reflection, and that's for a few reasons. First up, it has a ton of evasion rating and a ton of energy shield, which fits perfectly, especially since we want to make use of Ghost Dance. It gives us 30 all res, which is a ton for this build. We don't have that many rare items that actually have space for res, so that is just absolutely massive. We also get Intelligence, which helps us fix the leadership's price problem once we have everything on. We have way too much dexterity, so getting int anywhere is really strong. Then we also have Unaffected by Curses, which if you're mapping, you know how strong that actually is. And then at the end, 20% increased effect of your curses, which increases your single target damage by quite a bit with Flammability and Sniper's Mark. More on that a little bit later. As for boots, what you want is Elusive, Cooldown Recovery, and Onslaught. Explaining exactly how you can craft these is a little bit too long for this video on top, but I will say that it is the same process as Tailwind, Elusive, Onslaught boots. So if you have never crafted any of those, that's definitely something you want to look up anyways, because those are also used a lot on builds in general. Other than that, I have the chance to avoid being stunned if you've killed recently. If you don't care about stun, you can also just go for movement speed. This is also one of the few sources of Chaos Rest that we actually have. In terms of your gloves, you want the exposure right here, the -16 fire res, and the unnerve in the implicit. Otherwise, whatever you can get. You can get it to fix your intelligence, get some life, maybe some res. And as you can see here, we also use it for spell suppression. At the end, the one ring is actually massively important. It gives us reduced mana cost of skills in the implicit. This is a synthesized ring. But even more important is that you have an open prefix for the -8 to total mana cost. And at the end, if you want something like crit multi is always nice. Intelligence is nice to fix. Otherwise, just life and risk. Now, when it comes to jewels, we're only using 2 unique ones. The first one is the most important one, which is Militant Faith. Now, this will help you a ton with reducing your mana cost, which is a pretty big feat. And also, it will reduce the amount of dexterity you have, making it easier for Leadership's Price to actually be activated. As a second mod, I would say you can get LE damage if you don't need the res. So I think there's area damage per 10 devotion and LE damage per 10 devotion. Both work out. Now, when you're choosing one, just make sure that you don't get one that sort of bricks one of these nodes right here. So you can import it into PoB and kind of see if it bricks anything before you buy it. And what I mean by that is the notables can be transformed, like, for example, Frenzied Faith or Martyr's Might here. Now, there might even be something that you want to get. I didn't really get that fancy with it. Maybe you can figure something out. Overall, I was just looking that it doesn't brick any of the notables I already have. And as a secondary thing, the Watcher's Eye, there's one mod that is incredibly important and the other one is kind of fill in. And that is the life per enemy hit while affected by vitality. So this is so strong because it doesn't just say spell hit or attack hit, it is both. So every single proc with your KB and every single fireball that hits on the screen gives you 30 life back, which adds up very, very quickly to like thousands of life per second. It is absolutely huge, even against single target, but especially when you're mapping. And after that, the world is your oyster. Get any grace mod that gives you, like, maybe you can fix your spell suppression, you can get movement speed, or as I did here, some damage with Zealotry. And after that, what you want is life, as much crit multi as you can, and then whatever, like resistance, reduced mana cost, whatever you want. Attack speed with wands is also fine. The way you can make these is you can actually craft them here, or you can do dense fossils. Now you can reforge crit until you get something good. Now, it's not that likely that you hit something good, but the blue juice right now isn't worth that much, so you can definitely try it yourself. We did this on New Year's, actually, and we made all of these jewels ourselves. The only jewel I didn't make myself was the one right here, which gives us Corrupted Blood. You definitely want one somewhere. As for flasks, what we're using is a quartz flask with evasion rating. We're using grace, so that's very strong. I had a jade flask here, but not having facing was just so awkward for me. Against the boss, it doesn't really matter, so against the boss, you can definitely go for a jade flask instead. I also went for diamond flask, just gives us a ton of crit. Very good on cast and crit. Then we have as much movement speed as possible with a Quicksilver. And then the 2 unique flasks we're using is number 1, Dying Sun. I would only use Dying Sun if you're mapping against bosses. You want to swap this out against Taste of Hate. And Progenesis, in my opinion, is one of the most broken items in the game right now. We have a ton of life gain on hit on this build. So whenever we take damage and we take 25% of that damage over 4 seconds, we have a ton of time to regen that back with life gain on hit. absolutely insane flask. It's even a amethyst flask, meaning it helps us a little bit with our chaos risk. Now, also a question I get asked a lot is, why don't I use Aureus? And the quick answer is, I don't know how to fit it. And when I tried it, I had a perfect one. I bought it. It didn't really do anything. As you can see in the intro, like everything just gets eaten alive by every single projectile with chains around. I did not feel a difference at all. Also, the corpse explosion would be nice, but it's only 30%, so you're still going to die to corpse explode. Overall, I would say if you want to fit it in, it just didn't do anything for me. All right, so next up, let's talk about gem setup. First up, we have Divergent Fireball. The Divergent is very strong because it gives you increased effect of non-damaging elements. The less damage with Ignite doesn't matter at all. So it's basically just upside. This helps a lot to get your Brittle up, get your Sapped up, get your Scorched up. So if you can get a Divergent one, that is absolutely massive. And then Awakened cast on Critical Strike is going to give you a lot of cooldown recovery over the normal one. So definitely try and get that one as high as possible, as soon as possible. If you need level 6 or not, just depends on if you have a +1. I actually wouldn't need it because I have the +1, but if you don't have that, you definitely want the level 6. Otherwise, you're not going to reach the next cooldown recovery breakpoint. Kinetic Blast is our proc. Now, there's also memes with like the fork version of this. So some people are using this one here, mostly 5-way farmers with AoE after forking, but I tried out forking and I will just say this right away. It was completely overkill. It didn't really feel necessary, and our main setup is just extremely tight. We would have to replace an Empower, which would mean losing a third of our damage. Then we have Divergent Inspiration. It is important that you get a Divergent Inspiration because Divergent gives you even more reduced mana cost, and reduced mana cost stacks additively with each other. So the more you get, the better it gets. So Divergent Inspiration on top of some jewels that also give you reduced mana cost is going to be absolutely massive. More on that at the end when we talk about mana cost. And then at the end, if you can afford it, Awakened GMP, obviously better than normal GMP, but you definitely want to use it. If you don't have Awakened, you probably want to use Greater Volley because it doesn't give you as much less damage. Then we have our Sniper's Mark setup, which is Divergent Mark on hit with Sniper's Mark. We also have Life Tap. It's not really necessary at this point, I feel like, because I did turn around. I did get a level 4 Enlighten, but just play around with that. Otherwise, you can also replace the Life Tab. Just make sure that you actually have the mana to proc these. And then we also put Enhance on top, which gives you extra stuff with the Sniper's Mark. Our auras are Herald of Ash, Grace, Zealotry, and then also Vitality and Precision. The only reason we have the Vitality is our Watchers are right here, which gives us 29 life per enemy hit while affected by Vitality. Otherwise, you don't need Vitality at all, but that mod is incredibly important, as I already talked about. Precision fixes our accuracy and it fixes our crit. Zealotry, you can play around with going for Purity of Elements. I ended up kicking it because I didn't need the res, and I already had Chill and Freeze Immune on my boots, so I was like, but you can definitely go for Purity if you don't care about the damage. Grace is absolutely necessary. It is huge on this build, especially with the Ghost Shrouds. And Herald of Ash gives you a little bit more damage, but on top of that, it looks very fancy. Then we have the second Enhance setup. As I said, Enhance is basically just there to pump up the abilities you're using a little bit. But here it's actually very, very nice. So projectile speed is very strong because it makes your fireballs come back earlier, giving you better clear and faster single target damage. Basically, the ramp up time is not as long, right? So Anomalous Blood and Sand, it's only about the quality. This only has 10% mana reservation, so it's not that big of a deal. But the quality with the Enhance gives you actually 47% increased projectile speed, which is a premium stat because we're not a bowcaster. Meaning getting projectile speed from other places is very hard other than the wand, right? So that is where we get most of our projectile speed from. If you try it out and you say, I don't care about it, or if you don't have enough mana up for it, then just cut it if you want to. I just love it. It feels so good. And then also Anomalous Flammability. The Enhance is here for a little bit of extra curse effect. This is basically against bosses. Now, one thing I will say is that if you're not bossing at all, you should not take Whispers of Doom and Flammability at all. It is like 50% more damage against bosses. However, if you're not bossing anyways, against map bosses, unless you have really shitty gear, you're not going to have to cast it. It's just going to fall over immediately. In that case, just go for something like a Heart of Flame. Then we have Cost when damage taken and Immortal Call. Believe it or not, we don't have any Endurance Charge generation. Immortal Call is still the best. I don't have enough strength to level it up to fully. So Steel Skin wouldn't be as good. Immortal Call, just straight up better, even though we have no support whatsoever for it. Then what else? Shield Charge with faster attacks, pretty self-explanatory. And a Vaal Haste to round it up. We're not using Haste, just a Vaal portion. And when it comes to passive tree, this one is pretty cookie cutter. We want to get to 2 cluster jewels, so we have full access to 4 mediums. The mediums we're going to use are 3 times crit with pressure points and quick getaway, for good crit, but also attack speed, double damage, movement speed, right? It's going to make the build feel very good, and it's also going to compensate that we're not assassin. Other than that, I guess some interesting things is, for example, our militant faith is here, so we pathed through these 2 points instead of this 1 dexterity point. So these 20 devotion give us extra reduced cost and extra res, and we also don't want dexterity once again. Then we need also more intelligence to get our leadership's price to work, right? Which is also one of the reasons why I didn't path out here, and I pathed out here naturally. Once again, important, the +3 to level of all critical support gems, so you can actually reach your cooldown recovery breakpoint with the awakened cost on crit. Very, very important. These nodes are kind of interchangeable. The build actually looks a lot more fancy with these nodes if you're mapping. So if you're mostly going to map with, which I think is the most fun with this build, obviously, I would definitely leave them here. They also fall into the militant phase, so they give a little bit of devotion, but it's mostly about the chaining range. You're really going to feel this one. It also makes it so you get the more projectile speed, making your projectiles return faster. Otherwise, I guess the large clusters quickly, we have Smoking Remains, Prismatic Heart, and Widespread Destruction. You can do here whatever you want. You definitely want the Prismatic Hearts though, because they help us a lot with res. Also, this one node here works wonders, life and mana on hit. Whenever you hit something with a KB, you get 4 life and 2 mana. The mana is the important part here. You can also get it on jewels if it doesn't cost you too much. Meaning, if you can still get crit multi and the mana gain on hit, right? You don't want to sacrifice crit multi because that one is very, very important. Other than that, anything interesting here? So if you need more mana reservation, you can change the movement speed. If you haven't taken damage recently, to Grace Reservation, helps up a ton. I chose not to in the end because I had enough up. Ghost Dance is important because it gives you a little bit extra recovery here. We have like 700 ES, and this recovers it whenever you get hit. Some life, both aura clusters, obviously. And yeah, I think there's not much more to say. We can talk about Eldritch Battery in a second. All right, so next up, let's talk about a pretty contentious topic when it comes to cast and crit, and that is how to fix your mana. Ever since they changed cast and crit to where you actually need to pay the mana cost whenever you proc, you can see how that's a little bit of a problem ever since then because you're proccing so frequently, right? That is sort of the deal. When it comes to the first thing I want to point out here, fixing your mana, the first thing you always have to look at is that your Kinetic Blast costs at least 1 mana. It is not enough for your Fireball to cost just mana, right? The procced one. It needs to be upfront costs and effects, and that is only the trigger. So your Fireball will obviously cost mana, but you also need to make sure that you don't have too much minus mana to where your Kinetic Blast costs 0, because then you lose all the damage from your Divergent Inspiration. With that out of the way, though, there's 2 ways to fix your mana. First up, scale as much percentage reduced mana cost as possible. As you can see here, we have Nimis and we have Leadership's Price, so there's only 1 jewelry spot left for the minus mana cost. So what we need to do is get as much reduced mana cost as possible first. The way it works is these stack additively, so the more you have, the better. For example, if you go from 80 to 90% reduced mana, that means you basically half the mana cost of your spell. And since items are just different, right? You're gonna have different items than I have. I can't give you an exact like number of how much you have to get here, how much you have to get there. I can only guide you and give you every possible way you can kind of solve the mana problem. And we're gonna quickly get this out of the way. If you have a Mage Blood, you're basically done, because what you do with Mage Blood is you go here, you craft on reduced mana cost of skills during effect, which is always up. And with Mage Blood, it's going to scale up to like 50%. That on top of Divergent Inspiration is already going to fix anything. Just make sure that your Kinetic Blast costs at least 1 mana. But with that out of the way, let's talk about real solutions, right? So reduced mana cost craft, as I just talked about, is a little bit unreliable if you don't have a Mage Blood, because if it's not up, basically your build will not function, right? Which isn't a problem in mapping. It is basically never going to be a problem, especially if you have the prefix with chance to gain flash charge when you deal a critical strike. It's mostly going to be fine. However, if you're bossing, this is basically a no-go. You can try it out. It is going to be a big band-aid fix for a lot of builds. So yeah, that is the first step where you can start. I personally don't have it, but if I had worse gear, I definitely would use it. Then we have the Mana Mastery. So as you can see right here, I fix my reduced mana cost with, for example, a Synthesis Implicit, and I have it on some of the jewels. Yeah, reduced mana cost here and somewhere else. However, what you can also do is you can go Mind Drinker and then get the Mana Mastery here with 10% reduced mana cost of skills. Not only that, but Mind Drinker also gives you mana on kill, so that's very nice. Then once again, the percentage reduced mana cost on jewels. The main problem with this is you don't really want to just go for it, right? Because most of the time you will have to sacrifice crit multi, right? Or maybe even life. You really only want to get it if you can get it and crit multi. So that makes it kind of rough to do. I crafted most of these myself. We did a lot of crafting, But overall, I would say this is like kind of like a not the best solution because you definitely need the crit multi. After that, we have Militant Faith. Everybody should be using a Militant Faith. Once again, the keystone doesn't matter, which makes this a lot easier to get. Just make sure that you don't break any of your keystones with it. So import it into PoB before you buy any of these Militant Faiths. You want the 1% reduced mana cost of skills per 10 devotion. That's also why we path here to get more devotion. If you are just like 1 or 2% off, you can also path like here and maybe cut some of this. So there's definitely ways to abuse Militant Faith even more. And then there's also a little bit of a ghetto mode that I had at the start, which is Impossible Escape on Glancing Blows. Impossible Escape is the jewel. It makes it so you're able to pick all the nodes around a certain keystone. And if you have that with Glancing Blows, you can actually take all the tireless nodes right here, which gives you reduced cost and also some life. I think this is a very much the last sort of solutions. Before you do that, maybe you could also look into 2 other solutions, which don't really revolve around this sort of mana cost stacking. And that is first up, Eldritch Battery. Now, Eldritch Battery, a pretty damn good solution, right? You're right here, or if you don't want to spend the 2 points, you can also get it on your relic with an invocation. Now, the reason I didn't go for it in the end is I actually wanted a little bit more defense, and having Ghost Dance and an extra 760 energy shield was just huge. And if you use Eldritch Battery, you get a little bit squishier, right? Because your energy shield doesn't protect you anymore, and it's just mana instead. Also, even if you are Eldritch Battery, just make sure you understand that you're still spending a ton of mana. If you're Eldritch Battery, you cannot also go Inspiration because Inspiration only works on mana, which means that each of your fireballs is going to cost you like 100 energy shields. So just make sure that you know what you're getting into. This is not a one-stop fix for the whole build. You're still going to have to be running, for example, Militant Faith and still have to kind of actually test out if it's still good enough. At the end, we have the Enduring Mana Flask, the old tried and true last resort if you really need mana that badly. Overall, it's not a bad one. You can also go with that plus the reduced mana cost if you really want to. I would say that overall, this should probably just be a bandit fix, but once again, if you're mapping, you can definitely go for it. The worst thing about this is that it's actually hard to replace something here. I guess the most likely one would maybe be the Quartz Flask and then get your phasing from like a, I don't know, an Hypnotic Eye Jewel or something. So yeah, I'm just going to throw it into here if you really need it. As for leveling, we went with the tried and true dexterity stacking Val Smite setup using Hollow Palm technique. This is basically the premier way to level most characters nowadays, and you're basically going to one-shot anything in your way. Firegrass has a great guide over on maxroll.gg about it, so check that one out. I'll leave the link down in the description. But yeah, let's wrap things up. That's basically all I wanted to share you. Nimis is an absolutely incredibly fun item. If you want to play it in the form it is right now, I very much doubt we're going to have the same Nimis next patch. Now, obviously, I don't hope for nerfs, but it just seems like for certain builds, this just seems way too broken to be true. I have no idea how this actually got into the game, so I can only tell you to maybe try out anything. Doesn't have to be my build. Maybe you can come up with something different. I'm just saying, get yourself in on the Nimis train, have some fun with it. I know it's expensive, but if you can farm for it, it's definitely worth. Even if you can't play the build or you don't want to play the build, I hope you maybe learned a thing or two, and see ya. But that's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do stuff like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. But yeah, this build has been incredibly fun, and we're still gonna continue playing it. Overall, I can't really say much more. I never thought I would be playing Fireball in 2023, but thank you very much, Jungrown. And with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.